My name is Charlotte. I'm 31 years old, and I never expected the worst thing my mother-in-law ever said to me would end up being the moment I finally stopped needing her approval at all. I remember standing in her kitchen that afternoon, the smell of her cinnamon candles filling the air, the same candles she'd burned every time I visited since Ryan and I first started dating 6 years earlier. Diane had never fully accepted me, not really. She was polite in front of Ryan, careful with her words at family dinners, but there was always something cold underneath the surface whenever we were alone together. That day, I'd come to her house with something important to share, something I'd been holding on to carefully for the past week, waiting for the right moment to tell her in person instead of over the phone. I hadn't expected to walk into the middle of whatever mood she was in that afternoon, her arms crossed tightly, her expression already tense before I'd even said a single word to her. "Charlotte," she said, her voice clipped, formal in a way that immediately put me on edge. I set my bag down slowly, sensing something in the air that felt different from her usual coolness. "Is everything okay?" I asked carefully, glancing around the kitchen, noticing her coffee cup sitting untouched on the counter, steam still rising faintly from the surface. She turned to face me fully then, her expression hardening into something I hadn't seen directed at me quite so openly before, not even during our most tense conversations over the years. "I think it's time I said something honestly," she began, her tone measured, deliberate, like she'd rehearsed this moment more than once before I'd actually walked through her door. My stomach tightened instinctively. Whatever she was about to say, I could tell from her posture alone that it wasn't going to be anything close to kind or welcoming. "Diane, what's going on?" I asked again, my voice steadier than I felt, bracing myself for whatever she'd clearly been waiting to unload onto me for who knew how long. She took a slow breath, straightening her shoulders, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the room feel smaller, colder, despite the warm afternoon sunlight streaming through her windows. "Leaving you," she said slowly, each word deliberate, "was the best decision my son ever made." The sentence landed like a physical blow, knocking the air straight out of my lungs. I stood there, frozen, my coffee cup shaking slightly in my hand, the liquid nearly spilling over the edge before I managed to set it down carefully on the counter beside me. "Excuse me?" I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper, unable to fully process what she'd just said to me so plainly, so confidently, like she'd been waiting years to say it. "You heard me," Diane continued, her chin lifting slightly, a satisfied edge creeping into her voice now that she'd finally said the words out loud after what felt like years of holding them back. "He's better off without you, Charlotte. I've always thought so. And now that he's finally seen it too, I don't have to pretend otherwise anymore." Her words cut deep, sharper than anything she'd said before. I felt tears stinging the corners of my eyes, though I refused to let them fall in front of her, refused to give her the satisfaction of watching me crumble completely in her kitchen. "Ryan and I broke up months ago," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady despite the hurt building rapidly inside my chest with every second that passed between us. "Exactly," she said, almost triumphant now. "And it was the best thing that could have happened to him. I'm sure you understand why I feel that way, given everything." Her smugness was unmistakable. I opened my mouth to respond, anger and hurt tangling together painfully. But I forced myself to stay calm, remembering exactly why I'd actually come to her house that afternoon in the first place. "Diane," I said carefully, my voice quieter now, though steadier than before. "There's something I need to tell you, something that happened this past week that you don't know about yet." Her smug expression faltered slightly, curiosity flickering across her face despite herself, though she quickly masked it with the same cold composure she always carried around me. "What could you possibly need to tell me?" she asked, crossing her arms tighter, clearly expecting nothing that would challenge the confident declaration she'd just made moments earlier. I took a slow breath, steadying myself completely before speaking again, feeling a strange calm settle over me despite everything she'd just said, despite the sting still lingering beneath my composure. Ryan and I reconciled, I said quietly. We got back together last week. I wanted you to hear it directly from me before you heard it from anyone else. I watched her face carefully as the words landed. I'll keep it flowing naturally and stop right before she says, "That's impossible." Diane's face shifted the moment the words left my mouth, her composure cracking just slightly before she caught herself and forced it back into place, though not quickly enough to hide what I'd seen. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice tighter now, the confidence from moments earlier suddenly less certain than it had been when she was declaring how much better off Ryan was without me. "We got back together," I repeated calmly, watching her carefully, feeling a strange sense of steadiness settle over me despite the tension thick in the air between us. Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying my face like she was searching for some sign that I might be lying, some indication that this was some kind of cruel joke I'd decided to play on her. "That's not possible," she said slowly, though her voice lacked the same certainty it had carried just minutes earlier when she'd told me leaving me was the best decision Ryan ever made. "Why isn't it possible?" I asked, keeping my tone even, refusing to let the hurt from her earlier words creep back into my voice now that I finally had something real to stand on. She hesitated, her hand gripping the edge of the counter slightly, her knuckles whitening as she seemed to search for the right words to push back against what I'd just told her. "Ryan told me he was done," she said firmly, though something in her voice wavered slightly, like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. "When did he tell you that?" I asked, genuinely curious now, watching her expression shift again, uncertainty flickering briefly beneath the surface of her carefully maintained composure. "A few months ago," she said, "right after you two split. He said it was over. He said he wasn't going back." Her voice grew slightly defensive, like she needed those words to still be true. "That was months ago, Diane," I said quietly. "People change. Circumstances change. Ryan and I talked things through, and we decided to give our relationship another chance." She crossed her arms tighter, clearly trying to regain the confident footing she'd had just minutes earlier, though I could see the effort it now took her to maintain that same composure. "He didn't mention any of this to me," she said, her voice sharper now, almost accusatory, like Ryan keeping this from her was somehow my fault, instead of simply his own decision. "Maybe he wanted to tell you himself," I offered, though I suspected the real reason was that Ryan knew exactly how she'd react, the same reaction currently unfolding in front of me. Diane's jaw tightened, and for a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching uncomfortably between us as she processed information that clearly wasn't fitting into the narrative she'd built. "This changes nothing," she finally said, though her voice lacked real conviction now. "I still believe he's better off without the complications you bring into his life, Charlotte." I felt a flash of anger at that, though I kept my expression steady, refusing to let her see how deeply her words still had the power to sting, even now, even after everything. "That's your opinion," I said calmly, "but it doesn't change the fact that we're together again. And we're happy. Whether you approve or not isn't something I can control." She opened her mouth to respond, but something in her expression shifted again, a flicker of doubt crossing her face, like she was suddenly less sure of everything she'd said moments earlier. I watched her carefully, sensing that whatever confidence she'd walked into this conversation with had started crumbling the moment I mentioned Ryan and I were back together as a couple. "Does he know you're here right now?" she asked suddenly, her voice quieter, almost cautious, like she was trying to figure out exactly how much control she still had over the situation. "No," I admitted honestly. "I wanted to tell you myself in person, before anything else happened." I watched her expression tighten again at that admission, uncertainty clearly building beneath her composure. Diane glanced toward her phone sitting on the counter beside her coffee cup, like she was considering calling Ryan directly to confirm what I'd just told her, needing proof beyond my words alone. "I don't believe you," she said finally, though her voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying the doubt she was clearly trying hard to suppress in front of me. "That's fine," I said simply. "You don't have to believe me right now. But Ryan will be calling you tonight about our dinner plans, and I think you'll believe him. I watched her expression falter completely. Right as I finished speaking, my phone buzzed loudly in my pocket, the sound cutting sharply through the tense silence between us, both of our eyes dropping instantly toward the sound. I glanced down at my phone, my heart skipping slightly when I saw Ryan's name lighting up the screen, the timing feeling almost too perfect given the conversation we'd just been having. Diane's eyes stayed fixed on my phone too, her expression tightening with a mixture of curiosity and something that looked uncomfortably close to dread as the buzzing continued between us. "Aren't you going to answer that?" she asked, her voice quieter now, none of the sharpness from earlier remaining, replaced instead by a cautious uncertainty I hadn't heard from her before. "It's Ryan," I said simply, watching her reaction carefully as I said his name aloud, noting the way her shoulders stiffened slightly at the confirmation of exactly who was calling. I answered the call, keeping my voice steady despite the pounding of my own heart, still processing everything that had unfolded in the kitchen over just the past few minutes. "Hey," I said, glancing briefly at Diane before continuing. "I'm actually at your mom's place right now. We've been having a bit of a conversation." I watched Diane's expression shift again at my words. "Oh, perfect." Ryan's voice came through clearly, warm and unaware of the tension currently filling his mother's kitchen. "That actually makes this easier. Put me on speaker. I want to tell you both something." I hesitated for just a moment, glancing at Diane, who was watching me intently, before pressing the speaker button and setting the phone down carefully on the counter between us. "Ryan, sweetheart," Diane said quickly, leaning slightly toward the phone, her voice regaining some of its composure now that she had a chance to speak with him directly. "Hey, Mom," Ryan said cheerfully, his tone completely different from the careful tension filling the room around us. "I was actually about to call you about dinner tonight, but this works even better." Diane's eyes flicked toward me briefly, uncertainty still lingering beneath her expression, clearly bracing herself for whatever confirmation was about to come through the phone between us. "Mom, I know Charlotte probably already told you," Ryan continued, "but I wanted you to hear this part directly from me, too, since it's honestly the best news I've had in a long time." My own heart pounded as I listened, knowing exactly what he was about to say, watching Diane's face carefully as she waited, still clinging slightly to whatever doubt she had left about our reconciliation. "Charlotte and I are back together," Ryan said, his voice full of genuine happiness, the kind I hadn't heard from him in months, not since before everything had fallen apart between us the first time. Diane's shoulders sagged slightly, though she said nothing yet, clearly absorbing the confirmation she'd been resisting since the moment I told her the same thing just minutes earlier in person. "I know you had your doubts about us," Ryan continued, unaware of exactly what his mother had said to me right before this call came through. "But I've never been happier, Mom. Honestly." I watched Diane's jaw tighten slightly, her earlier confidence now completely gone, replaced by something closer to quiet discomfort as she listened to her son's genuine happiness through the phone. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she managed, though her voice lacked the warmth she was clearly trying to inject into it, the mismatch between her words and her earlier declaration hanging heavily in the air. "There's actually something else too," Ryan said, and I felt my stomach flip slightly, knowing exactly what was coming next. The news we'd agreed to share together once we found the right moment. Diane leaned in slightly closer to the phone, her curiosity clearly overriding whatever discomfort she was still feeling, sensing correctly that something significant was still left unsaid between us. "What else?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost bracing herself, like some part of her already sensed that whatever came next would matter even more than the reconciliation itself. I glanced at my phone sitting on the counter, then up at Diane's face, watching her carefully as Ryan's voice filled the silence between us, ready to share the news that would change everything completely. "Mom?" Ryan said, his voice softening with unmistakable emotion now. "Charlotte's pregnant. We're having a baby." The words landed in the kitchen like a wave crashing over both of us simultaneously. I watched Diane's face carefully as the sentence registered, her expression shifting rapidly from confusion into something closer to shock, her hand instinctively reaching out to grip the counter beside her. The coffee pot rattled slightly as her hand landed near it, her breathing suddenly shallow. Her earlier declaration about Ryan being better off without me now hanging awkwardly in the space between all three of us. Diane's hand stayed pressed against the counter, her knuckles whitening slightly as she tried to steady herself, the coffee pot still rattling softly from where she'd bumped it moments earlier. "A baby," she repeated quietly, almost to herself, like saying the words aloud might help her fully process what Ryan had just announced through the phone sitting between us. "Mom, are you there?" Ryan's voice came through again, warm and unaware of the tension thick in the kitchen, the silence on our end clearly stretching longer than he'd expected after his announcement. "Yes, I'm here," Diane said quickly, forcing brightness into her voice that didn't quite reach her eyes, still visibly shaken by everything unfolding faster than she could process. "That's incredible news, sweetheart," she continued, though her gaze drifted toward me as she spoke. Something complicated flickering behind her expression that I couldn't fully read yet. "I know, right?" Ryan said happily, completely unaware of the undercurrent running through his mother's kitchen. "We wanted you to be one of the first to know, Mom." "I appreciate that," Diane said, her voice steadier now, though I could see her visibly working to keep her composure intact in front of both of us at once. "I'll let you two talk," Ryan added. "I've got a meeting starting soon, but I'll call you later tonight, Mom. Love you." The call ended a moment later, leaving Diane and me alone again in the sudden quiet. The kitchen felt different now, heavier somehow, the earlier tension replaced by something new settling over both of us as the reality of everything sank in completely. Diane finally turned to face me fully, her expression a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite untangle, shock and something like embarrassment blending together beneath her carefully maintained composure. "You're pregnant," she said slowly, like she needed to hear herself say the words in order to fully believe them, her eyes dropping briefly toward my midsection before returning to my face. "I am," I confirmed quietly, watching her carefully, giving her space to process everything without rushing to fill the silence between us with anything else just yet. She was quiet for a long moment, her hand finally releasing its grip on the counter, though her posture remained tense, uncertain, clearly still working through everything she'd just learned. "I said some things earlier," she started slowly, her voice quieter now, lacking the sharp confidence it had carried at the very beginning of our conversation before any of this happened. "You did," I said simply, refusing to soften the moment for her, refusing to make this easier than it needed to be after everything she'd said to me just minutes earlier. "I didn't know," she said, though her voice trailed off, like even she recognized how weak that explanation sounded given the certainty she'd spoken with before learning any of this. "You didn't know we were back together," I said carefully. "But that's not really the point, is it? You said what you said believing it was true. That still matters, Diane." She looked down at the counter, her fingers tracing the edge of it absently, clearly searching for something to say that might undo the damage already sitting heavily in the room between us. "I said leaving you was the best decision he ever made," she said quietly, repeating her own words back like she was hearing them for the first time, understanding now exactly how they sounded. "You did," I confirmed again, my voice steady despite the hurt still sitting beneath the surface, refusing to let her off the hook simply because circumstances had shifted so dramatically. "I didn't mean—" she started, but I found myself shaking my head slightly, cutting her off gently but firmly before she could finish the sentence. "You meant it, Diane," I said calmly. "You meant every word. I just wanted you to say it to my face before finding out the truth changed everything you thought you understood." She flinched slightly at that, the accuracy of my words clearly landing harder than anything else said between us that entire afternoon, her earlier confidence now completely dismantled. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. genuine uncertainty replacing the sharp composure she'd walked into this conversation with originally. I picked up my bag from where I'd set it down earlier, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me, despite everything that had just unfolded across her kitchen counter between us. Diane's words hung in the air between us, her disbelief still radiating off her in waves, her hand gripping the edge of the counter like she needed something solid to hold on to. "That's impossible," she repeated, shaking her head slightly, as if saying it a second time might make it more true than the first time she'd said it. "Ryan told me himself," she continued, her voice rising slightly. "He sat right here at this table and told me he was done, that he'd never go back to you, not after everything." I stayed quiet for a moment, letting her finish, watching the way her composure was already beginning to crack, despite how hard she was trying to hold on to it. "That was months ago, Diane," I said gently. "Things change. People change. Ryan and I talked things through, really talked, and we both wanted to try again." She crossed her arms tighter, clearly grasping for some way to push back against what I'd just told her, though I could see the certainty draining slowly from her expression. "I don't understand why he wouldn't tell me something this important himself," she said, more to herself than to me, her voice edged with something between hurt and suspicion. "Maybe he wanted the chance to tell you properly," I offered quietly, though I suspected the real reason was that Ryan already knew exactly how she'd react to the news. Just as she opened her mouth to respond again, my phone buzzed loudly in my pocket, the sound cutting sharply through the tense silence filling the kitchen around us. I glanced down instinctively, my heart skipping slightly when I saw Ryan's name lighting up the screen, the timing feeling almost too perfect given everything we'd just been discussing. Diane's eyes dropped to my phone too, her expression shifting instantly, curiosity and something like dread crossing her face at the same time as the buzzing continued. "Aren't you going to answer that?" she asked, her voice quieter now, none of the sharpness from a moment ago remaining, replaced instead by a cautious uncertainty. "It's Ryan," I said simply, watching her reaction carefully as I said his name aloud, noting the way her shoulders stiffened slightly at the confirmation of who was calling. I remembered he'd mentioned earlier that week he wanted to check in with his mother about dinner plans, a small detail I hadn't thought much about until this exact moment. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second, some part of me sensing that whatever happened next in this kitchen was about to shift entirely once I answered that call. Diane straightened slightly, smoothing her blouse, some old habit of composing herself in front of her son kicking in despite everything already unraveling around her. "Go ahead," she said, her voice steadier now, though I could hear the tension still lingering just beneath the surface of her forced calm. I glanced at her one more time, feeling strangely steady myself, before finally sliding my thumb across the screen to accept the call vibrating persistently in my hand. The phone continued buzzing for just a moment longer in my palm, the screen glowing with Ryan's photo, a picture from a trip we'd taken together long before any of this had fallen apart. I thought briefly about how unaware he probably was of the conversation happening in his mother's kitchen right now, how he had no idea I was standing here at all. Diane watched me carefully, her earlier confidence now completely replaced by something closer to nervous anticipation, waiting to hear whatever Ryan was calling to say. I took a breath, steadying myself completely, aware that whatever came next would either confirm everything I'd just told her or somehow complicate things even further. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the tension from moments earlier now mixed with a new kind of anticipation neither of us fully understood, yet standing there together. I pressed the button to answer, lifting the phone slightly, deciding in that instant to put the call on speaker so Diane could hear exactly what her son had to say herself. "My name is Charlotte," and in that moment, phone buzzing steadily in my hand, I had no idea just how quickly the next few minutes would change everything in that kitchen completely. I pressed the speaker button and set the phone gently on the counter between us, Ryan's voice filling the kitchen a moment later, warm and completely unaware of the tension surrounding us. "Hey, babe," he said cheerfully, his tone light in a way that felt almost jarring against the heaviness still hanging in the room around Diane and me. "Hey," I said, glancing briefly at Diane before continuing. "I'm actually at your mom's place right now. We've been having a bit of a conversation." There was a short pause on the line, Ryan clearly processing that piece of information, though his voice stayed just as easygoing when he spoke again a second later. "Oh, perfect timing then," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "That actually makes this a lot easier. Is she there with you? Put me on speaker for a second." "You're already on speaker," I said, watching Diane's expression carefully as she leaned slightly closer toward the phone sitting between us on the counter. "Even better," Ryan said, a smile clearly evident in his voice. "Mom, are you there? I was actually about to call you myself about tonight." "I'm here, sweetheart," Diane said quickly, straightening her posture, some old instinct of composing herself for her son kicking in despite everything still unresolved between us. "Good," Ryan said, "because I wanted to tell you both something, and honestly, I'm glad you're together right now, so I only have to say it once." I felt my pulse quicken slightly, knowing exactly what he was about to share. The same news we'd agreed to tell his mother together once the timing felt right. Diane's eyes flicked toward me again, uncertainty still lingering behind her expression, clearly bracing herself for whatever confirmation was coming through the phone next. "I was just about to tell her our news," Ryan continued, his voice practically bursting with excitement now, completely unaware of the reaction already building silently around him. "What news?" Diane asked, though her voice had shifted slightly, quieter now, some of her earlier certainty clearly wavering the longer this conversation continued. I stayed quiet, letting Ryan continue, watching Diane's face carefully as she waited, still visibly holding on to some thread of doubt about everything I'd already told her. "Well," Ryan said, drawing the moment out slightly, clearly savoring it in a way that made my chest tighten with a mixture of nerves and anticipation all at once. "Charlotte and I got back together," he said first, his voice warm with genuine happiness. "I know it's a lot, Mom, but I've never felt more sure about anything." Diane's shoulders sagged slightly at the confirmation, though she said nothing yet, clearly absorbing information she'd been resisting since the moment I'd first told her myself. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she managed, though her voice lacked the warmth she was clearly trying to force into it for her son's sake over the phone. "I know you had your doubts," Ryan continued, unaware of exactly what she'd said to me minutes earlier, "but I promise you, this is different. We're really happy, Mom." I watched Diane's jaw tighten slightly, the mismatch between her earlier declaration and her son's genuine happiness clearly becoming harder for her to hold together internally. "I'm glad, Ryan," she said carefully, her eyes meeting mine briefly across the counter, something complicated passing silently between us in that short exchange. "There's actually one more thing," Ryan added, and I felt my stomach flip slightly, knowing exactly what was coming next in this conversation neither of us could stop now. Diane leaned in slightly closer to the phone, her curiosity clearly overriding whatever discomfort she still felt, sensing correctly that something significant remained unsaid. I glanced at the phone, then up at Diane's face, watching her carefully as Ryan's voice filled the silence between us, ready to share news that would change everything completely. "My name is Charlotte, and standing there in that kitchen, I braced myself, knowing the next words out of Ryan's mouth were about to land harder than anything said so far. "What is it?" Diane asked again, her voice quieter now, almost bracing herself, like some part of her already sensed the next thing would matter even more than the reconciliation itself. I glanced at the phone sitting on the counter, then up at Diane, watching her carefully as Ryan's voice filled the silence between us, ready to deliver the news we'd planned to share together. "Mom," Ryan said, his voice softening with unmistakable emotion now. "Charlotte's pregnant. We're having a baby." The words landed in the kitchen like a wave crashing over both of us at once. For a moment, nobody said anything. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of a clock somewhere in the hallway outside the kitchen. I watched Diane's face carefully as the sentence registered, her expression shifting rapidly from confusion into something closer to shock, her breath catching audibly in her throat. "A baby," she repeated softly, almost to herself, her hand instinctively reaching out to grip the edge of the counter beside her, steadying herself against something suddenly too heavy to stand through alone. The coffee pot rattled slightly as her elbow brushed against it, the small sound feeling unusually loud in the stunned silence that had settled over the kitchen around us. "Mom, you still there?" Ryan asked through the phone, his voice carrying a note of concern now, clearly noticing the extended pause on our end of the call. "Yes, I'm here," Diane said quickly, though her voice wavered slightly, none of her usual composure fully returning yet, as she tried to process everything at once. "That's incredible news, sweetheart," she continued, forcing warmth into her voice that didn't quite reach her eyes, her gaze drifting toward me as she spoke the words aloud. I stayed quiet, watching her carefully, giving her the space to sit with everything now unfolding rapidly in front of her without rushing to fill the silence myself. "I know, right?" Ryan said happily, completely unaware of the tension thick in his mother's kitchen. "We wanted you to be one of the first to know, Mom. Are you excited?" "Of course," Diane said, though the word came out slightly strained, her eyes still fixed on me, something complicated passing behind her expression that I couldn't fully read yet. "I'll let you two talk," Ryan said. "I've got a meeting starting soon, but I'll call you later tonight, Mom. Love you both." The call ended a moment later, the line going quiet. The kitchen felt different now, heavier somehow. The earlier tension shifting into something new settling over both of us as the full reality of everything sank in completely. Diane turned to face me fully, her hand still resting against the counter, her expression a tangled mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something like quiet disbelief. "You're pregnant," she said slowly, like she needed to hear herself say the words aloud in order to fully believe them, her eyes dropping briefly toward my stomach before returning to my face. "I am," I confirmed quietly, watching her carefully, giving her room to process everything without rushing to soften the moment more than it already deserved to be softened. She was quiet for a long moment, her hand finally releasing its grip on the counter, though her posture remained tense, clearly still working through everything she'd just learned. I could see her mind working, replaying her own words from minutes earlier, watching the realization settle fully across her face now that the shock had started giving way to something else. "I said some things earlier," she started slowly, her voice quieter now, lacking the sharp confidence it had carried at the very beginning of our conversation before any of this happened. I didn't respond right away, letting the silence stretch between us, letting her sit fully in the weight of what she'd said before finding out any of what I'd just told her. Diane's hand drifted back to the counter, steadying herself again, though this time it felt less like shock and more like she was bracing for whatever I might say next. You said leaving her was the best thing he ever did," I reminded her calmly, my voice steady despite everything still sitting heavily beneath the surface of my own emotions. She flinched slightly at hearing her own words repeated back to her, the accuracy of them clearly landing harder now than they had when she'd first spoken them so confidently. "I know what I said," she replied quietly, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in all the years I'd known her, none of her usual sharpness remaining in her tone anymore. "I just wanted you to hear it back," I said, keeping my voice even, refusing to let anger creep into words that felt more powerful delivered calmly than they ever would shouted. Diane looked down at the counter, her fingers tracing the edge of it absently, clearly searching for something that might soften the weight of what she'd already said to me. "I was upset," she started. "Ryan told me things had ended for good. I let my disappointment get the better of me, and I said something I shouldn't have said." "That's not really an explanation," I said gently, though firmly. "You didn't misspeak, Diane. You told me exactly what you believed, clearly, and without hesitation. She was quiet for a moment, absorbing that, her earlier composure now completely gone, replaced by something closer to genuine discomfort with herself and her own words. "I know how it sounded," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the entire conversation clearly settling over her more heavily with every passing second. "It sounded exactly like what it was," I said quietly. "You've never fully accepted me, Diane. Today you just finally said it out loud, thinking there'd be no consequences." Her eyes lifted to meet mine, something vulnerable flickering behind them now, a version of her I hadn't seen before in all the years since I'd first met Ryan's mother. "I didn't expect any of this," she said, gesturing vaguely between us, though I understood she meant the reconciliation, the pregnancy, the entire unraveling of her earlier certainty. "None of us expect the truth to catch up with us," I said, keeping my tone measured. "But it usually does eventually, whether we're ready for it or not." She nodded slowly, her hand finally leaving the counter, though she still looked unsteady, like the ground beneath her had shifted more than she was fully prepared to admit. "What do you want me to say?" she asked quietly, genuine uncertainty coloring her voice now, none of the defensive edge from earlier in our conversation remaining anymore. "I don't need you to say anything specific," I told her honestly. "I just needed you to sit with what you actually said, now that you know it isn't true anymore." Diane wrapped her arms around herself slightly, an unfamiliar vulnerability settling over her posture, so different from the confident woman who had greeted me at her door earlier. "I've never been good at admitting when I'm wrong," she admitted quietly, almost more to herself than to me, her eyes drifting briefly toward the phone still resting on the counter. "I noticed," I said, though not unkindly, simply stating a fact we both already understood clearly after everything that had unfolded between us that afternoon. She let out a shaky breath, running a hand through her hair, clearly trying to gather herself enough to say something more substantial than the fragments she'd offered so far. "I don't want this to be how things stay between us," she finally said, her voice steadier now, though still carrying the weight of everything still unresolved in that kitchen. I studied her for a moment, weighing her words carefully, unsure yet how much I was ready to believe given everything that had just happened in front of me. "I didn't mean—" Diane started again, her voice trailing off as she searched for words that might soften what she'd already said so plainly earlier in our conversation. I watched her carefully, recognizing the familiar shape of an excuse forming, the same kind of deflection I'd heard from her more times than I could count over the years. "You didn't mean for me to find out about our reconciliation before you said it," I said quietly, cutting her off gently but firmly, refusing to let the moment slip into something softer. She paused, her mouth still slightly open, clearly caught off guard by how precisely I'd identified exactly what she was trying to avoid admitting to herself and to me. "That's not what I—" She tried again, though her voice lacked conviction now, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them into the space between us. "You meant every word, Diane," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the years of quiet hurt sitting just beneath the surface of everything I was choosing to say right now. She looked away briefly, her eyes dropping toward the counter, unable to hold my gaze as the accuracy of my words settled fully over her for the second time that afternoon. "I just wanted you to say it to my face," I continued, "before finding out the truth, because that's who you really are when you think there's nothing at stake." Her shoulders sagged slightly at that, the weight of the observation clearly landing harder than anything she'd braced herself for since the phone call had ended minutes earlier. "I've spent years being polite around you," I said, my voice softening slightly, though not losing its steadiness. "Today you finally showed me what you actually think." Diane's eyes filled with tears again, though this time they seemed different, less about being caught and more about genuinely confronting something she'd avoided facing for years. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling now, all pretense of composure completely gone from the woman who had greeted me so coldly earlier. I'm not asking you to fix it right now, I said honestly. I'm asking you to sit with it, to actually understand what you said and why you felt comfortable saying it. She nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand, the vulnerability in her expression feeling almost unfamiliar against the sharp woman I'd known for years. I always thought I was protecting Ryan, she said quietly, almost to herself. I never stopped to think about what that protection actually meant for you, for us. That's the first honest thing you've said today, I told her, my voice steady but not unkind, simply acknowledging the shift I could see happening in front of me. She looked up at me then, something different in her expression now, the beginning of real understanding replacing the earlier certainty that had walked into this conversation with her. I don't expect you to trust me right away, she said carefully. I know I have a long way to go before any of this actually means something between us. I appreciated the honesty in that admission, though I didn't say so immediately, still processing everything that had unfolded across her kitchen counter in such a short amount of time. The silence between us stretched for a moment, not entirely comfortable, but no longer filled with the same sharp tension that had defined the beginning of our conversation. I glanced toward the door, feeling the pull to leave now that everything important had finally been said, the weight of the afternoon settling completely across my shoulders. Diane seemed to sense the shift too, her posture straightening slightly, though the earlier confidence remained entirely absent from how she carried herself now in front of me. "Charlotte," she said quietly, "thank you for telling me the truth, even after everything I said before I knew any of it." Her voice carried genuine sincerity for the first time. I reached down and picked up my bag from where I'd set it earlier, feeling the weight of the entire conversation settle differently now than it had when I first walked through her door. Diane watched me quietly, her earlier composure still nowhere to be found, replaced by something uncertain, almost fragile in the way she stood there beside her kitchen counter. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. I said to myself silently, feeling the finality of the movement, the sense that this conversation had reached its natural conclusion. "Ryan and I are building our family," I said, turning to face her one last time, my voice calm, but carrying a clarity I hadn't felt walking into her house earlier that afternoon. "Without needing your approval," I continued, watching her expression shift slightly at the words, the truth of them settling over her without any bitterness attached to how I said them. Diane nodded slowly, her eyes glistening slightly, though she didn't try to argue or soften what I'd just told her, seeming to understand exactly how much weight the statement carried. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice steadier now than it had been throughout most of our conversation, some genuine acceptance finally settling into her expression. "You can join us," I said, my tone softening just slightly, though the boundary remained firm and unmistakable beneath the calm delivery of my words to her. "When you're ready to respect that," I finished, watching her carefully, giving her the space to absorb exactly what I was offering and exactly what I expected moving forward. She was quiet for a long moment, her hands folding together in front of her, clearly considering the weight of what I'd just said before responding to me directly. "I want to be ready," she said finally, her voice sincere in a way I hadn't heard from her before, something genuine replacing the sharp confidence she'd carried at the start. "That's a start," I said honestly, refusing to promise more than I actually felt in that moment, though allowing space for the possibility of something better eventually forming between us. I turned toward the door, my hand resting briefly against the frame, feeling the afternoon sunlight spilling into the hallway ahead of me as I prepared to step outside. "Charlotte," Diane said behind me, her voice soft. I paused, glancing back at her one final time, curious what else she might have left to say after everything already spoken. "Thank you for coming here today," she said quietly. "For telling me yourself, even knowing how I might react. That took more courage than I probably deserved from you." I offered her a small nod, not quite a smile, but something close to acknowledgement, recognizing the effort behind her words, even if trust would take considerably longer to rebuild. "I'll see you at dinner tonight," I said simply, deciding that showing up mattered more right now than dwelling further on everything already said between us in that kitchen. Diane nodded, her expression carrying a mixture of relief and lingering uncertainty, clearly aware that one conversation, however honest, wouldn't undo years of quiet distance instantly. I opened her front door, the afternoon sunlight spilling warmly into the hallway around me, the tension from earlier finally beginning to lift from my shoulders as I stepped outside. Walking to my car, I thought about everything that had unfolded in such a short amount of time, how quickly certainty could crumble once the truth arrived to challenge it directly. I thought about the baby growing inside me, about the kind of family I wanted to build, about how boundaries mattered just as much as forgiveness in shaping something lasting. Diane's words from earlier still echoed faintly in my mind, though they no longer carried the same sting they had when she'd first spoken them so confidently into her kitchen. "My name is Charlotte, and that afternoon taught me something I'll carry into motherhood completely. The truth has a way of arriving exactly when it's needed most, even in someone else's certainty."